A Jewish story tells of a thief who lived a long and a notorious life. Upon his death, he was sentenced to a permanent stay in hell. While waiting arraignment in Hasatan's courtroom, he noticed that beneath Satan's table, right under his feet, was a huge bag of Israel's sins that had been collected throughout the generations, that had been made ready for Israel's condemnation before the heavenly judge. The thief realized that it was for this very moment that he had been created. Deftly, with practiced dexterity, he lifted the bag and cast it into the fires of hell, saving his people from eternal damnation. Distraught that his evil plan was foiled, Satan reached out to crush the soul of the thief when a heavenly messenger arrived to carry the thief to God's joyful presence. The story was first told by Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, and it could be told every single Rosh Hashanah, for the themes and parallels to this season are many. Our transgressions collect, if unrepented, and tip the scales of judgment against us. All are responsible for one another, as the transgressions of our neighbors weigh on us as well. A heavenly messenger arriving at the last minute parallels our reading of Torah. I could go on, but I tell you this story not because of its parallels to the Yamim Noraim, but rather about whom it is told. The holy thief of Berdichev had very few descendants, said Rabbi Ed Feinstein when he told this story in the year 2000. It is my joy, he said, to present one as a candidate for ordination. I present the holy thief of Beit Teshuvah, Mark Borowitz. There perhaps hasn't been a more unlikely candidate to become a rabbi, a scholar, a Jewish communal leader, since Reish Lakish in the Talmud, a gladiator turned rabbi. Mark Borowitz was a mobster, a gangster, a con man, a gambler, a thief, a drunk, his own words, who only began to take his obligations to Judaism and to his fellow human beings seriously during his second prison sentence. On parole, he joined Harriet Rosetto in opening Beit Teshuvah, a Jewish residential addiction treatment center, perhaps the Jewish residential addiction treatment center. I got to know Mark as a character and as a force for good in this world when I would take my 8th grade class to Los Angeles to learn from the residents of Beit Teshuvah. I came to respect Rabbi Mark as a teacher of Torah when he came to Pittsburgh. Together at Federation, with colleagues throughout the area, we learned about his work at Beit Teshuvah, life-saving lessons that we could implement to help people wrestling with addiction, and we learned about Mark's reframe of a traditional Jewish concept that just might have the power to bring us all back from the brink this Rosh Hashanah. You're likely familiar with the terms Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Hatov, often translated as evil inclination, Yetzer Hara, and good inclination, Yetzer Hatov. My mind's eye pictures them as a little cartoon devil on one side and a little cartoon angel on the other, whispering in our ear what we should or shouldn't do, though that's perhaps a tad oversimplified for this foundational Jewish concept of human motivations. Instead of thinking of these as the impulse to do evil or the impulse to do good, Rabbi Borowitz taught, we should see them instead as an engine and a steering wheel. Echoing Bereshit Rabbah, Mark teaches that the Yetzer Hara isn't an inclination toward evil, but toward self-interest. And Yetzer Hatov isn't about personal good, but about collective good. If not for self-interest, though, he taught, for ambition, for personal gain, we wouldn't spend the money to build a house. We wouldn't spend the money to have children. We wouldn't engage in the marketplace. We wouldn't keep building and striving and conquering. We need our self-interest. It's our personal motivation, and it's our engine. But if we are only for ourselves, well, that's where the Yetzer Hatov comes in, the steering wheel, reminding us that naked self-interest isn't the right direction for a humanity responsible one for the other. Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Hatov, the engine and the steering wheel, self-interest and collective good, a balance that we have lost in our American life. Our American secular experience focuses exclusively on rights and personal liberties, our obsession with our Yetzer Hara, and it has not only trumped but obliterated our societal sense of obligation and responsibility, our Yetzer Hatov. It's tearing us apart. We fight over 10-cent masks and vaccine mandates and over science itself, rather than coming together to balance the competing needs of protecting the most vulnerable in our society while also maintaining the economy. We rage online over school board policies and vaccine passports and my right to make whatever decision I want for my family with whatever sources of information I deem relevant, rather than coming together to balance the competing socio-emotional needs of our children with their physical well-being. We have lost any sense of balance, and it is tearing us apart. How can we begin to reclaim some of that balance? I believe that we have to better understand the challenge of rightsism as it currently exists today, that we have to fear the absolutism that comes with that rightsism, and that we have to embrace the sense of obligation that Jewish tradition demands. In his book, How Rights Went Wrong, Columbia law professor Jamal Green argues that we have fetishized the idea of rights to the level of rightsism. And allow me to be clear, adding ism to any word doesn't make it better. Think racism or sexism. We have different tastes, he says. We look different, speak different languages, eat different foods, entertain ourselves differently, worship different gods, form different familial and social bonds, hold different acts, images, symbols, historical figures, and episodes as either beautiful or contemptuous, humorous, obscene, sacred, or ridiculous. Claiming rights, the right to free speech, the right to freedom of worship, the right to get married, the right to bear arms, the right to not wear a mask or to be vaccinated against a global pandemic. Claiming rights is how we try to preserve our uniqueness. And with so many people and so many different opinions, it's inevitable that there are going to be competing claims over rights. Rights are everywhere, but we disagree intensely and often in good faith about what rights to protect. It's how we respond that makes all of the difference. Do we try to discriminate between rights, picking winners and losers, declaring one right more legally valid than another? Or should we try to mediate between rights, recognizing legitimacy in competing claims and trying to reconcile differences when possible? We've been trying that discrimination path for quite a while now. It's led us to thinking about our rights as infallible absolutes, Green suggests, in a way that creates not only winners and losers, but pits neighbor against neighbor in zero-sum conflict. Each side has an incentive to make even more absolutist arguments, denying the morality of those with whom we disagree, subsequently blinding ourselves to the dignity in their claims. When recognizing our neighbor's rights necessarily extinguishes our own, a type of survival instinct kicks in. Our opponents in a rights conflict become not simply fellow citizens who disagree with us, but enemies out to destroy us. And with the stakes so high, polarization should not just be expected, but indeed, it's probably the only sensible response. If only one side can win, it might as well be my side. Green continues, conflict over rights can encourage us to take aim at our political opponents instead of speaking to them, and we shoot to kill. I doubt he knew how prescient his words would be. May 1st, 2020, Calvin Munerlin, 43, asked a customer to put on a mask in accordance with state law before entering his store. He was shot and killed. January 29th, 2021, Frankie Duckett, 49, asked a passenger to put on a mask before boarding his bus to protect others against COVID-19. he was shot and killed. June 14, 2021, Lakita Willis, 41, asked a customer in her supermarket checkout line to put on a mask to protect her against COVID-19. She was shot and killed. We've become so polarized, so absolutely positively convinced in our truth about our rights, that we're willing to take another human life over a 6-inch square piece of fabric. If I get the exclusive, fetishized, weaponized right, then you must be wholly, dehumanizingly wrong. Right? Is this really the concept of rights we believe this country was founded upon? Is this right? That's not how Judaism sees it. Instead of exclusive rights, we have obligations. Obligations bein adam lemakom, between us and God, and bein adam lechavero, between us and our fellow human beings. In Jewishly inspired conversations about the end of life, we don't talk about bodily autonomy and my right to do anything, but rather we ask, to whom am I responsible? To my Creator, to my family, to the values with which I tried to live my life. In Jewish conversations about parenting and being parented, it's not about my rights, but about my obligations and my responsibilities. And as Rabbi Avi Shafran, spokesperson for Agudath Israel of America, the Haredi Orthodox umbrella organization, writes, while the much-invoked aphorism, the right to swing my fist ends where another man's nose begins, while that may well reflect the American legal approach, Judaism sees the assailant who doesn't stop at a nose not as having violated the nose owner's rights, but as having incurred responsibilities, obligations to pay for damages, for pain, for medical bills, for missed work, for embarrassment that the fist owner has wrought. It's a subtle but important distinction. It's the difference between the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Hatov. When we're looking at a rights conflict through the lens of our Yetzer Hara, our own self-interest, we have no reason and no desire to find common ground. We see in the opposing position the worst possible version of our opponents. This absolutist approach to rights, this binary zero-sum thinking of rightsism, isn't just wrong, it's dangerous. When we look at rights conflicts through the lens of our Yetzer Hatov, however, the steering wheel for our naked self-interest reminds us that we are part of a collective good, and all of a sudden, mediation looks much more attractive. It's not about balancing one side over the other, or maximizing social welfare as some crude economic formula, but it's about recognizing that we are irrevocably interconnected and that the facts of any particular situation, and that the public interest involved, should have a seat at the table. What is our obligation to our neighbors, our Yetzer Hatov asks, not how can we best them in conflict. Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Hatov, the engine and the steering wheel, self-interest and collective good, a balance within our own individual selves and hopefully one day again this nation. We must seek to protect our self-interest and our rights. We all have hopes and fears that matter, but that conflict with the hopes and fears of our fellow human beings. Individual rights, our Yetzer Hara, aren't necessarily bad, but we must think about the impact of our self-interest on the collective good and be steered by our obligations toward our God, toward our families, toward our highest values, toward our religious tradition, and toward one another. The descendant of the holy thief of Berdichev, Rabbi Mark Borowitz, took 2 prison sentences to work out this balance. His firm grip on his steering wheel, his Yetzer Hatov, saved so many lives. So too will our change in direction. We do have rights, and we do have obligations. Can we reclaim their balance before we hit rock bottom?